Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Making More from Sheep webinar, a joint initiative of MLA and AWI. Now, tonight's webinar is going to be wool business benchmarks, an industry update with Holmes Sackett. My name's David Brown and I'm going to be your webinar host tonight. Just a quick reminder that next week we are continuing with the webinar series. We have a webinar. It's going to be run by Mr. Peter James of University of Queensland, who is an expert in the field of lice management, and he'll be walking us through the best practice strategies of managing and controlling lice, eradication programs, up-to-date information on the best chemicals and their resistance, and a little bit of an overview of lice epidemiology, so that we're able to make informed decisions when we're tackling lice issues on our own properties. Now, for those who have not attended one of the Making More from Sheep webinars before, it's a simple process. This control panel should be on the right hand side of your screen. The red arrow button on the left of that control panel will collapse it so that you do not miss too much of the visual involved in the webinar. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Now, the questions box is an important part of tonight's activities. I encourage you to write a few comments in that questions box now, because it lets us know that number one, you know where it is, and number two, you can hear me. Yep, a few people writing in there. Thank you very much. It's good to hear that a bit of some good starts to the season in different areas, and probably a little bit warm and dry in others. So just quickly, the Making More from Sheep program is a really well resourced online facility for producers to access. Now, if you want to duck online at any time, just dial in Making More from Sheep or MMFS even, and the home page should pop up. So tonight's webinar comes under the banner of Module 1, Planning. So if you have any more topics of interest, you can access those modules online and see what information the Making More from Sheep program has got to offer. And if you have any other questions about the program, you're more than welcome to contact Holmes Sackett, as we're the New South Wales State Coordinators of the Making More from Sheep program. Oh, look, someone's let me know that they couldn't see my screen, and I apologise for that. Thank you for letting me know. It's been a bit of a mistake on my behalf. Hopefully you can see my screen now, and I apologise. You didn't miss much, guys. Don't worry. It was just the introduction and a little bit about the webinar platform. Look, tonight I'm honoured to be able to present the actual webinar as well as chair it myself. My name's David Brown, and I've been working with Holmes Sackett now for just on 7 years. Three of those years I was in a part-time capacity as I completed some postgraduate studies, and in the last 3 or 3.5 to almost 4 now, I've been there in a full-time capacity, assisting the business on projects, industry projects, publications, and one of my favourite parts of the work, analysing, interpreting and extending the benchmarking activities that we participate in for industries, individual producers and our producer groups. So I think one of my strengths and one of the things that has brought me to tonight is definitely that I'm more passionate about finding opportunities to increase wool business profitability than I am in actually chairing the webinars. I suppose one of my faults would be sometimes I'm inclined to talk a little bit slow, earning myself the nickname of Dr. 3 words a minute. And I I normally pick up on this when my wife falls asleep at the dinner table and I'm trying to tell her something. So tonight I'm going to try and jazz it up a little bit, keep it going as quick as I can. And if anyone thinks I'm going too slow, well, I can't see you, but I'll just attempt to keep it upbeat. Now, on to the actual webinar. This is a quick overview of actually where we're pulling our data that's going to form the basis of tonight's webinar. So we're going to be looking at the 2015-16 performance of wool flocks, and we're also going to be looking at some long-term benchmarks and strategies that are driving wool flock profitability. Just quickly, this map here demonstrates the spread of the Holmes Sackett wool benchmarking database. The 60 points on this map actually understates the 90 plus wool flocks benchmarked in the 15-16 year. One thing that does jump out though is we see a range of different climatic zones, regions, possible systems, animal types, scale, intensity and markets. The two pictures I got included there highlight this, and you can see that we've got merino flocks coming from the arid interior and the partial areas of the Riverina, Queensland, northwest New South Wales, and we've also got flocks from the high rainfall areas of southeast New South Wales, southeast South Australia, southwestern and central Victoria, Tasmania, the New England, and even Flinders Islands. So to overcome the differences that obviously are posed by pulling data from such a wide area, most data we present is on a per DSE basis. A DSE is a dry sheep equivalent, a standard unit of energy that allows the comparison of different livestock enterprises. Some data, although is required to be presented on a per hectare per 100 mil of rainfall basis, and a technique that allows for comparison of different land use efficiency relative to rainfall. This technique works reasonably well in between the 500 to 800 mil rain zone, but it becomes less relevant outside of this zone. So if you're in a very arid area or very high area, very high rainfall area, the efficacy of rainfall drops away and it becomes quite hard to compete at these per hectare per 100 mil of rainfall KPIs or key performance indicators. The spread of the database also means that some of the key performance indicators we commonly use in comparing flocks need to be considered in the context of your business, especially those we talked about relating to production, or some form of production per area. For example, if you are on the edge of a hillside and a majority of your country is maybe light shaly or sandy country, it's going to be, even if you do have a 600 or 800 mil rainfall, it's going to be very hard for you to compete because a lot of that rainfall runs off or goes straight through and doesn't convert into actual pasture production. Likewise, if you've got lots of flats or prone to flooding or waterlogging, and then it's a similar circumstance where that rain is not converted into pasture production and ultimately meat and wool. However, some of the producers who do participate in the benchmarking do procure more regionally relevant data by participating in local groups which have customised group reports produced so that they're able to compare their businesses with like businesses in a similar area. Now, this spread of data doesn't let everyone off the hook. Exceptions don't negate the rule, and every farm has its own set of challenges and it's up to the manager to manage them. I don't believe there's any such thing as a perfect farm, and if we do find that perfect farm, generally they're too expensive to buy. So everyone's up against a limited, challenging set of resources, and these benchmarks still prevail and provide an indication of what we should be aiming for at least, and to improve the profitability of our merino businesses. So a wool data set is actually just merino flocks, either self-replacing or trading weather flocks. Now, over 95% of what you're looking at here is self-replacing merino ewe flocks. Obviously, ewes that are joined to terminal, or maternal size are strictly excluded from the wool analysis. The 2016 year or 91 specialist wool flocks benchmark. You can see the regions from where those benchmarks are drawn from on the map there. And we also, luckily we had a few groups join us in the 16 year, predominantly from the New England and the Southern Tablelands and the Riverina. So they have helped bolster our regionally relevant production and financial data in those areas for wool flocks. Now the rainfall received across the benchmark year was only 2% below the long-term average, but obviously there is a wide range of seasons in that area, across those areas within the year. The median flock size was 9,000 DSEs, ranging from very small 600 DSEs to a larger business 44,000 DSEs. And the median grazed area was 12,000 hectares, but once again a huge range from 40 to 76,000 hectares grazed. So that gives us all an indication of where we're pulling the data from, and some of the considerations we need to be thinking about when it comes to interpreting the remainder of this presentation. Before we hop in, apologise for that, before we hop into, my apologies, I'm still on the wrong slide here. Before we hop into just the wool flocks, I just wanted to draw a quick comparison between wool and the key competing land uses, prime lamb and beef. Now there's no doubt that beef has been a standout performer in the 2015-16 year thanks to a large market shift in the right direction. But over the last 5 years, wool flocks have actually been the most impressive of these key enterprises. Note that I haven't included dual purpose in this graph because it has a hybrid income of wool and meat. Now I just wanted to focus on the key enterprises. Also, dual purpose often represents only a small part of overall businesses, as they often run alongside a self-replacing merino flock. That said, dual purpose flocks have always been the most profitable of livestock enterprises, and this hasn't changed over the years, but once again only a small part of most businesses unless they buy and use, and I haven't put them in here to convolute the message. This bodes well for wool producers though who have stuck to the So wool has actually performed the best over the last 5 years out of prime lamb and beef and wool. Now this bodes well for producers who have stuck with the enterprise and have continued to seek productivity gains and cost savings. There's been periods when competing land uses have looked pretty attractive, especially when we've been over trying to save a sheep from the next flyer wave and the EMI has been trending south for too long. A cursory look at the 10-year average of profitability of these three enterprises on a net profit per DSE basis demonstrates a similar trend, with wool still being the leading enterprise. It's only when we actually go out to year 19 that we start to see a small shuffling of the deck chairs in the favour of prime lamb. Now, this slide here demonstrates the average total income per DSE for wool flocks in the 2015-16 year, and the sections within it demonstrate the breakup of that income into different expenses and the resultant profit. Just excuse me for a second, guys. Alright, okay, back online. The average wool flock profit in 2016 was $14 per DSE, This obviously came from an income of $56 per DSE with $20 worth of enterprise expenses and $22 worth of overhead expenses. As usual, profits within the enterprise vary greatly, with profits ranging anywhere from a loss of 20 DSE to a profit of 44 DSE. Alternatively, the top 20% of wool flocks generated a profit of $32 per DSE. This was generated from an income of $67 per DSE, which was $16, from which $16 per DSE of enterprises were deducted and $19 of overhead expenses. This amount, or at least the percentage of marginal per DSE profit, is quite common from year to year, and obviously this quickly accrues over a few thousand DSEs to a large amount. Income streams are similar for average and top wool producers in 16. So there's a degree of industry sentiment. I'd like to highlight that to be a successful merino producer in this age, one needs to adopt a more dual purpose type animal and harness both the wool and meat income streams. This graph takes a closer look at the relative contribution of meat and wool to the wool flock income stream to help validate the sentiments. It shows that the top 20% generated a similar percentage more meat and wool income, 19 and 20% respectively, than the average. Now this resulted in $10 extra DSE, $10 extra profit per DSE over the average of the database. And the way these two income streams have been increased, or these data are relatively consistent between years. So I'm not advocating that meat income is not important to wool flock profitability. However, what I am advocating is that top 20% performance is not only achieved by increasing meat trading income. Some top 20% producers may have driven income up by increasing meat trading, but there have still been an equal or more number of businesses driving income up through increasing wool trading. Some producers will increase both. So let's get a bit technical with these two graphs here. Now these two graphs demonstrate the relationship between wool flock income and expense on the bottom axis versus the profit on the left axis for the Holmes Sackett data in the 16 year. Now each dot on the graphs represents a particular wool flock benchmarked in the 16 year and its resultant, and its income and its resultant net profit per DSE, and similar its expenses and its resultant net profit per DSE in the bottom right graph there. Now the trend lines through the middle demonstrate roughly what direction the relationship is heading and how strong that relationship is. So let's have a look here. I'm going to explain, well, I suppose the key message from the graph is that there are similar profit gains made through increasing income as there through reducing expenses. Now if we want to go into this a little bit further, let's just have a look at this figure here. So the trend line through the data at the top left of the graph in the 16 year suggests that for every $1 increase that there's been a every $1 increase in income, there's been a 77-cent increase in net profit. Now that's indicated in these formulas here by the number immediately preceding the X. So it's not unexpected that a $1 increase in income does not translate directly into a $1 increase in profit, because there's always going to be a marginal cost of generating that additional income. A 77-cent increase in profit from $1 increase in income will not be achievable for all businesses. Some businesses already generate high incomes will struggle to convert every dollar of income into profit because the marginal costs of doing so become greater and greater. Now, the similar graph down the bottom right there demonstrates the relationship between expenses and profit. On average, every $1 reduction in the expenses has yielded a 66 cents of additional profit across the database. This means that boosting income or reducing expenses has yielded a similar amount of profit, 77 cents for every dollar of income increase, or 66 cents of profit for every reduction in every $1 reduction in expenses. Now, if we were to focus on the R squared part of the formulas presented here, R squared value represents the strength of the relationships. Now we can see that the income, so a strength of the relationship at R squared of closer to 1 indicates a very strong relationship between either income and net profit or expense and net profit, whereas an R squared of approaching 0 means that there's a very weak or non-existent relationship, and we can't really deduce anything from the relationship at all. Now we can see that income in this instance has a stronger, a 0.5 relationship with profit than does expenses relationship with profit, which is a 0.2. So what this means is that increased income was a more likely path to increase profit across the database in 2016. To wrap up, these graphs there's been opportunity at the database level to increase profits through both increasing and decreasing expenses. So we can see that both of them yield about 65 to 75 cents each. Now, at the individual's level, priorities will need to be set around a business's existing income and cost structure. Businesses should look to each side of the ledger, either income or expenses, and focus on the side that will provide the greatest and surest increase in profitability. So what this means is that given that there's a stronger relationship with income and net profit, well, in most instances this is where I'd be looking. Now if you've got a very high income business though, and your expense a high income business, and it's unlikely that you're going to generate that 77 cents for each marginal increase in marginal dollar increase in income, and then there might be a better opportunity to go back and have a look at your cost structure and start pulling that apart to find your next dollars or next 65 cents of profit. So on to the fun part of the evening. It's going to be taking a look at Holmes Sackett top 8 wool producers. What's beneath the businesses setting the benchmarks for tonight's webinar. So the top 20% each year captures wool flocks that have performed well on the back of good management and good seasons, or a little bit of both. Now I've done tonight's webinar the way like this so that we gain a true perspective of what top 20% management looks like over the long term. To do this, I've pulled these 8 top wool flocks together over the last 5 years and extracted them for the analysis tonight. All of these flocks have achieved a 5-year average rank of greater than the 80th percentile in either net profit per DSE or net profit per hectare per 100 mils, or both. Now it's important that we include those ranked highly on net profit per hectare per 100 mils because those businesses may have sacrificed some income per DSE or some profit per DSE, but they have made it up in spades in returns of net profit per hectare per 100 mils. Thus it's only pertinent to include those who rank well in both these important indicators of wool flock profitability. Because the flocks have needed 5 years of consecutive benchmarking data to be eligible for this analysis, some data sets from the Holmes Sackett database have not been included. And thus there have been other highly profitable flocks, but they're yet to earn their stripes as the most profitable over the long term. Now to characterise these flocks a little bit, 1 flock lambed in August, 4 flocks lambed in September, and 3 flocks have lambed in October. The August lambing flock was located in southern New South Wales, and the October lambing flocks were all located in Tasmania. Now that map there provides an indication of where these flocks have been pulled from. Now we've got a southeast New South Wales, we've got southwest Victoria, we've got Flinders Island, and we've got 3 on Tasmania. So like I said, there's going to be other highly profitable flocks, but we just don't have sufficient amount of data on them to confidently push them forward, or push the benchmarks forward as industry benchmarks, because without the data we can't be sure that they're going to be performing well over the long term. Now, the absence of an autumn or winter lambing flock is one key observation I want you to pick up. Now, obviously there's none here from a very partial region, but it is a key observation. It infers that dealing with the hardships of weaner management over summer, those hardships that come with later lambings, is generally more cost effective than feeding ewes or running lower stocking rates to have an early lambing flock. Now, some of these flocks included wethers, all of them included wethers actually, but the amount of wethers range from 8 to 26% of the total wool DSEs, and this hasn't really, this is similar to all the other flocks benchmarked over these years. So it's not a telling factor of success, but it's important to know that they do run anywhere between 8 and 26 DSEs of wethers beside their ewe flocks. Now, you would have received a text message early this evening with a very ambitious claim that these 8 flocks have generated an aggregate of $6 million of marginal profit, and I'm pretty keen to back that claim up and show you just how they did it. So the top 8 flocks have generated an additional $750,000 each over the last 5 years, and that's aggregated to the $6 million. So this graph is going to show the 5-year average income, expense, profit per DSE and profit per hectare per 100 millimetres for the average, both the average and the top 8 flocks in this analysis. Let's start with income per DSE. So here we can see that there's only a $4 increase in income per DSE between the average of the database over the last 5 years and these top 8 producers. If we have a look at our enterprise expenses, there's been a reduction of $2 from the average for the top 8 producers, and when we look at overheads, they've had slightly less overheads, it's $4 less. Now, these small differences surprisingly have accrued to $10 of marginal profit per DSE for the top 8 producers. Now, that figure, that $10 of marginal profit per DSE, combined over the DSEs that they run and the years included in this analysis, has been what has accrued to the extra $750,000 worth of profit for each business. Now, it's noteworthy that one of the businesses here has adopted a higher income, higher cost model, generating $21 per DSE more income than the average of the other top 8 producers, but it has spent $5 more per DSE than the average. Sorry, so it's generated $21 more income per DSE than the average, and it has only spent $5 per DSE more in expenses. So that's one of the 8 businesses. Now, the remainder of the 8 businesses have actually only had $1 more income per DSE than the average, but have had $7 less expenses per DSE than the average. Now, The top 8's most evident gains are in net profit per hectare per 100 millimetres. The top 8 have generated an additional $34 of net profit per hectare per 100 mils over the average, an increase of 158%. Now, I think this is what really excites me about the business, and when you turn that into a profit per hectare, so if we were to have $55 per hectare per 100 mil, if you're in a 600 mil rainfall zone, my mental arithmetic is not that great, but I think that accrues to about a bit over $300 of profit per hectare. And when you start looking at the interest bill that can carry, it bodes very well for expansion of wealth in agriculture. So, the key wool business benchmarks that stem from these businesses. Now, we expect, and these businesses here do it, for top businesses to be running between 2 to 2.5 DEC per hectare per 100 mil of rainfall. This equates for a 600 mil rainfall area about 12 to 15 DEC per hectare. Say if a Merino ewe equates to about 2.2 DEC, depending on system and the number of followers, this would mean that you're running about 6 ewes to the hectare. Now, once again, strong caveats around land type and rainfall. If you've got lots of ineffective or very little rainfall that also becomes ineffective, then it's actually quite hard to achieve this, but for a majority, I believe, of the participants tonight, this would be a fair and reasonable target to aim for. Now, we have 7 kilograms of clean wool per hectare per 100 mil of rainfall, and this equates to about 42 kilograms per hectare in the 600 mil rainfall zone. So if you have a clean fleece cut of 3 kilograms per DSC, this will do it. Increasing the proportion of the flock to wethers will assist because of their lower energy requirements and relatively high wool cuts. Weaning rate, 80%, but the range in these top 8 producers actually went from 65 to 105%. Now, at the lower end of the scale, there's obviously a very heavy focus on wool production. Their wool production or wool income represents about 75% of the total income, while at the other end of the scale, with the higher lambing percentages, wool income will represent roughly 60% of the total income. Only a few businesses have approximately half of their income coming from both wool and meat, and those businesses need to have very high lambing percentages and high growth rates in their surplus stock to achieve this. So as opposed to talking micron and fleece weight, I'm going to talk fleece value. So the average fleece value over the last 5 years of these top 8 producers is $50 per fleece. And I reckon this should be easily achieved in the recent wool market, and I dare say this benchmark will rise pretty soon if the current market conditions hold. How you get there is up to you. It will be based on your interpretation of the future of the wool market premiums. What strategies work best comes and goes with the premium. Sometimes it's fleece weight, sometimes it's micron. However, to give you an indication, these top producers have hovered around 17 to 18 micron, with fleece cuts around about that 3.5 to 3.7 kilos clean per adult. A $7.60 of wool cost of production, cost of production is a two-sided ledger. You can drive it down with low costs, or you can bring it down through high production. The lower your cost of production, the greater your profit margin in any given market. The wool producers are price takers in this commodity market, and COP is a key driver of profitability of those producers not in the possession of a crystal ball to read the markets, which equates to pretty much every business. Sensible cost structures under a strong production system will achieve this benchmark cost of production of $7.60 per kilogram of clean wool produced. One additional KPI there to help you get here is overhead should represent roughly half your total costs. Now, labour efficiency. we're veering away, well I'm veering away for the purpose of this webinar from DSCs per labour unit because it hasn't had the strongest relationship with profitability. Now, however, if you can produce $400,000 of gross income per labour unit, that's income adjusted for change in inventory, this includes, you will have a good chance of generating top 20% performance. Now, a labour unit includes all the family labour, your friends, contractors, in-laws, outlaws, shearers, permanent staff, and the owner of the business. It doesn't include capital labour. Now, it means that the timeliness, using this KPI means that timeliness and implementation of key production activities cannot be missed in the pursuit of higher labour efficiency. You have to have good income, around about $60 per DSC, and you'll need to run about 7,000 DSCs per labour unit to maintain this $400,000 worth of gross income per labour unit. If your income is inherently lower, then you're going to need to run more DSCs, which my experience suggests that only a few select businesses are going to be able to run at, more than 7,000 or 8,000 DSCs per labour unit. Now the last target there is $33 worth of expenses per DSC, which I'll break down more in a moment. Now the top 8 producers increase wool income more than their meat income. Now this is very similar to that last graph we looked at, which compared the income of the average producers versus the top 20% producers in the 2015-16 year. Now this is the same graph and you can interpret it in the same way, except it's between the average producers over the last 5 years and this cohort of the top 8 producers. Now what we can see is that they haven't generated much more income per DSC, and a majority, well, a slight increase in the percentage increase of wool trading income over the sheep trading or meat income over the average. So what this is signifying once again, or reiterating, is that it's not common for top performing businesses to be ramping up meat production in the pursuit of higher profitability. I suggest that there's probably easier ways of doing it, and ramping up wool production is one of those ways. Now it doesn't mean it can't be done both ways, but these top guys here, it's been done all bar one business. It's all been done through wool production. There's one business in there that's doing quite well from its meat production, but to place that in context, it does run its wool flock over a lot of grazing crops, and thus it's got a capacity to grow out sheep better and to lamb, or to have a lot of energy resources on tap for that merino production system. Now to break down that cost structure there before, I firmly believe that most businesses should be able to achieve about $33 per DSC worth of expenses. Now the breakdown of those costs will be $8 into labour, and that, like I said before, will be employed labour, owner labour, any contract labour. It doesn't include your shearers, because the shearers cost comes under shearing, crutching, which is the third one down. But if the kids come home from school, that cost is included in that labour figure. But those businesses that use a lot of owner labour will bear quite well in this figure, because often the the benchmarking methodology doesn't place as high cost on owner labour as often managed or employed labour comes at. Now you're going to have $5 per DSC for the feed base. Now that's going to include supplementary feeding, chemicals, fert, irrigation, lime, gypsum, seed, $6 for shearing and crutching. Now $3 for business, which includes insurance, administration, gas, electricity, rates and rents, $3 into animal health, $3 into selling costs, $2 in the vehicles and machinery, $2 per DSE into repairs and maintenance, and $1 into materials and freight. To help highlight how these compare to the average over the last 5 years, you'll see that there's been an 18% difference or reduction in the labour and feed base piece of these top 8 businesses versus the average. Shearing and crutching is only a reduction of 6%, but then we get down into the smaller cost categories. Business less 14%, animal health less only 3%, signifying that if you're going to stimp on costs, it's probably not in animal health. Surprisingly, these businesses haven't reduced their selling costs by much, only not at all actually. But once we get down into these vehicle machineries, repairs and maintenance, materials and freights, they become a much smaller part of the cost structure. So even though there's a 33% reduction in vehicles and machinery, you know that these businesses, this cost saving that businesses have achieved, it's not going to make big effects to the overall cost structure. So I think labour and feed base are key ones to be focusing on there, and in a similar fashion, animal health and selling costs, these may not be areas where our audience tonight need to look for immediately for cost savings. So I'm just going to run through some basic KPIs from these businesses so we can get an idea of what has actually really driven their performance over these 5 years. So it's spot the difference made easy. So if we looked at cost of production, they've managed to produce their wool at 16% less per kilo than the average. They've achieved a 7% premium for their price received of the wool. Surprisingly, their wool cut is only 3% higher per head, and their average fibre diameter only 1% lower. Income from wool, a negligible difference of -1%. However, wool production per kilograms per hectare per 100 mil, they've produced 51% more than the average, largely achieved by stocking rate, a 46% higher stocking rate at DCs per hectare per 100 mil. And interestingly, only a 2% higher weaning rate than the average. So in regard to the higher pasture utilisation driven by stocking rate, these top 8 flocks in the analysis don't subscribe to a scorched earth policy. They just utilise a few extra % of their pasture growth before it goes to waste each year. Now, to utilise that extra pasture growth, the top 8 will have, they'll lamb and spring, so that ewes don't need anything more than maintenance nutrition through late autumn, midwinter. They often feed. 3 of these 8 businesses have fed over $8 per DSE of supplement in the 2016 year, and they still achieved a net profit of $20 per DSE, which is very high. They have a low cost of production, achieved by maintaining high levels of production under sensible, or in brackets, low cost structures. They run at optimal stocking rates, and they have done this to have twofold benefits of assuring that animals, individual animals, are actually working quite efficiently, and that production per hectare is maximised. Those individual animal indicators such as wool cut per head and weaning percentage have not contributed much to their performance. This doesn't mean they're not important, but it just means that they're much less important than pasture utilisation through good stocking rate management. And as for those other remaining indicators such as income from wool, adult fibre diameter, price received, these factors appear marginal when in comparison to stocking rate and wool production per hectare when comparing the difference between the average and these top 8 producers. So key lessons we've learnt from the best producers. So they run at higher stocking rates. Despite these higher stocking rates, their income per DSC is similar to the average. It's not higher. And their costs per DSC have not been increased. These higher stocking rates are achieved through feed utilisation. They match feed supply with demand. They supplementary feed when necessary, and they, for instance, they lamb in late winter or spring, and they feed for maintenance. Now feeding has been a bit of a change in the game over the last few years. Back a fair few years ago, those businesses that just restricted to their supplementary feed incomes down to $2 and $3 per DSC were the only ones that were going to achieve reasonable levels of profitability. What we're finding now, with a huge disparity between grain prices and wool and meat prices, is that if you're not feeding in the interest of running more stock, you're missing out. So feed for maintenance, and do your sums if you think you're going to feed for production, i.e. feed lotting lambs and the like, because I hazard to guess that you'll be better off feeding for maintenance and running more ewes. And the last point I want to make is that additional meat income has not been a key driver of the success. Wool has been the focus of all but one of these businesses. So, just to rehash all those benchmarks, go and leave them up there. And that's the end of the webinar for this evening. And I'd like to open up the forum for questions. I can see quite a lot of questions coming through here. And I encourage you to jump online there. And if you have questions that you want to ask me, please do so. I've purposely excluded information on the basis that you can't get all across in a half hour, and that I expect there'll be some good questions to allow me to extrapolate on some of this information more during the question time. Now, before we do that, I just want to rehash that next week we've got a lice management webinar. It's going to be run by Peter James of University of Queensland. Peter's an expert in the field of lice. He has studied extensively in this area and has been instrumental in the setup and execution of lice management programs such as Lice Boss, and is a go-to man when it comes to understanding more about lice and its control, management and eradication. So I encourage everyone to come along to that webinar. I've chatted to Peter, and we've made sure that that actual webinar is going to be targeted at producers that are, I suppose, well versed in the area of lice. So he's not going to be dwelling on the basics. He's going to be going into a bit more detail, and he's going to be able to push, expand the audience in this area. Now, at the end of this webinar, there's going to be a survey pop up. If you want to leave your thoughts on how I performed this evening, please jump into that survey. I've grown a thick skin over the recent years, so if you think I need to, or we need to brush up on things, please leave your thoughts, make it constructive. No point criticising without leaving ideas for improvement. If you think we've done a good job, please leave those comments there, because no doubt I'll need them after some people soften me up. Now, there's been a few good questions coming through here. Let me just get on top of them and I'll be with you. So a good question from Joe. Does the 5-year average in the comparison between the top 8 producers, is that include the 15-16 year? Yes, Joe, it does. It's the 5 years up to and including the 15-16 year, and we've made sure that we're comparing like with like there in all instances. Another good question from Joe. Is there a consistency in the top 20% producers from year to year? Now, not every, in response to that question, Joe, not every business has been or will be in the top 20% for every year. Now, there are some businesses that get in the top 20% that are only there on good fortune. Maybe they've struck it lucky in the market, or they've found themselves under a few good rainfall events. Now, that is, we make it explicit, and it's one of the challenges of interpreting top 20% performance over a number of years. And you need to be careful, because it's, as you saw there, the top 20% income in 15-16 was much higher than the average. I think it was an increase of $16, I think it was. Now, when you actually came back and had a look at the top 8 producers over the average over the last 5 years, that increase in income was negligible. So what you're seeing there is we're starting to tease out the effect of luck and lucky and market changes and good seasons, and we're actually starting to hone in on management that's actually driving the performance. So intuitively, if you strip out those other factors affecting performance, the level of increased performance is going to be reduced, because if management is only one of the sum total of things affecting performance, then when we strip out the rest and left with just management, then that the effect on performance or profitability is going to be less. However, it does allow us to look more confidently at what those producers are doing over the long term, and try and I suppose highlight those differences and bring that to industry. And it's really only becoming possible. So we've got 19 years worth of data now. When I joined the business, we only had I think it was 12 years worth of data. So as this body of data starts to build up and we get more and more producers with long-term data sets, we can actually tease out individuals that are performing better and take closer looks at what they're doing. Just another question here from Sandy. Is this from the top producers or the average? Is this from the top 8 or the average? So Sandy, your question was just a bit hard to interpret there, but I think what you're asking is that the top 20% and the average, or is the top 8 and the average? So the last part of the webinar, the part that focused on the top wool industry benchmarks, those benchmarks have been taken from the top 8 producers, and not just the top 8 producers, but also some interpretation of other good highly profitable wool flocks across the database. We haven't used just top 20% data in that instance, for the same reasons that I discussed when I was dealing with Joe's question there. Just reading another question here. Ollie asked a question: what lower margin incomes are the top producers targeting with the recent price rises? So I can answer that question for you, Ollie. Those top producers, now just bear with me for a second. Those top producers in the, so I gave you 5-year averages. Now if we were to strip out and just look at the 2015-16 year, I apologise, I haven't got the 16-17 data in yet. We've still got to wait a few months before that starts coming in. but those top 8 producers in 2016 generated an income per DSE of $59 per DSE, whereas if you looked at the average of those businesses across all years, it was only $58. So in 15-16 they had no material increase in income per DSE, but no doubt in the 16-17 year, we expect that those incomes will be increased a little bit more. Now, just a little bit more on the income side of things. So out of those top 8 producers, there was one business, or there's actually 2 businesses that got through on only $52 worth of income per DSE. So they were the lowest income businesses, but they made up for this in spades by having a cost structure, total cost structure of only $30 per DSE. At the other end of the spectrum, we had a business that was generating $75 worth of profit per DSE and also incurring $44 worth of expenses per DSE. So there's a bit of a range in strategies there, but you can see that if you're running at the lower income end of the scale, you've got to back it up with a very tight expense structure per DSE. Just reading another question here, guys. A question from Graham. How many of the top 8 run a cell grazing operation, and how many rotationally graze? So Graham, I think you know as well as I do that one of the businesses uses a very strategic cell grazing program, and it's a very successful wool producing business. Now, it's a particularly interesting one in its setup and its productivity, which is phenomenal. Now, as for the other businesses, I can't speak for all of them, but I know for sure that 2 of the other 8 businesses do rotationally graze, and they're definitely not. They will lock their sheep up in summer and the late summer and early autumn if they need to, and feed them in drought lots in the interest of pasture preservation, and to make sure that they can carry those breeding stock through to the next production year. Now, I think rotational grazing is going to be a part to some extent of all those businesses, but I can't say for sure if any of the businesses strictly set stock, but I can guarantee that one of the businesses does participate in a pretty strategic cell grazing program. I've had that question repeated by James. Is there any pattern of the top 8 producers regrazing management, rotational versus cell grazing versus set stocking? Same answer, James. I don't have specifics on all of the businesses, but I do know that some of them are quite happy to lock their stock up in the late summer, defer their grazing, and to make sure they can hold the breeders through. I think rotational grazing is going to be part of all the businesses, but I'm not sure which ones would be set stocked, if any. A question from Paul. David, what would be a viable DSE number for a viable business? Paul, you may need to just hit me with that question again. If you're talking about stocking rate, I'll be happy to answer that. just write that question in again if you would, Paul, and I'll deal with it if you give me a little bit more context. So a good question from Bernie. Do the top producers increase their flocks by natural increase or buying stock? How does this affect the figures? Natural increase versus buying. So good question, Bernie. Now, these businesses, they've been participating in these benchmarking activities for quite a long time, and they have a very good grip of the key drivers of their profitability. And one of the key drivers of their profitability, I think, and I hope it's been highlighted tonight, is being able to match stocking rate with pasture availability. And that's not only going to be done through, your lambing pattern and your timing of sales and purchases, but it's also going to be driven by your capacity to get stock on and off the land at key periods. So in recent times, they have been buying, feed and feeding them on farm. In years before that, no doubt they would have been buying and selling stock, to meet the season. Now, where I'm leading to with that is that if they need to increase stock numbers in a period of surplus, they will do it in the season. They're not going to sit around and wait to increase numbers through breeding, because the marginal difference between breeding stock up and buying stock is very little. In fact, breeding stock up, you just forego sales in the current market, which is an opportunity cost, or alternatively, you just buy the stock at market prices. The key difference between them is that if you delay livestock purchases, you're foregoing opportunity profits or operational profits on those livestock. So I'm pretty confident that all the businesses in this analysis will be purchasing stock as soon as they need them to meet feed surpluses, to meet surplus and feed, and they won't be waiting around to increase stocking rate through natural increase. Question here from Bernie again: where would the break-even DSE rate be? So Bernie, so the benchmark we presented here, and the benchmark that the businesses I've been talking about have been achieving, is in between that 2 to 2.5 DSEs per hectare per 100 mil of rainfall. So once that's considered, you need to then consider roughly, obviously your rainfall, and that's year analysed rainfall. So if you have more rainfall and you want to perform well on that indicator, you actually need to increase the number of DSEs so you can trade in livestock, sheep, cattle, whatever suits. So you need to consider your rainfall in each given year and try and match your stocking rate to the rainfall. If it's effective rainfall, it's easy. If it's ineffective rainfall, if it's a big storm in the middle of summer, in a winter growth area, or big storm in the middle of winter and it doesn't grow, it's too cold, then it's going to be difficult. Now, if you're grazing sides of hills or flood outs, swampy country, it's going to be a different DSE rate. But what we're finding is if you're up over 2.5 to 3 DSEs per hectare, which some businesses have pushed before, this area starts to become less sustainable and puts a lot of pressure on the system. If you're back below 2 DSE to the hectare per 100 mil of rainfall, often there's the wastage of pasture gets higher and higher, even though you can't see it, because it eventually decays and blows away anyway. You always end up with no feed at the end of the season. It's just a matter of how much you've eaten before it all disappears at that point. So it's an open-ended question, Bernie, but if you've got reasonable country, 600 mil rainfall, high fertility, reasonable pastures, can't see why 2 to 2.5 DC per hectare isn't achievable. If you're trying to lamb outside of late winter and early spring, this is going to get harder because of the nutritional requirements placed on the breeding cohort of the flock over that midwinter or late autumn and midwinter period. Just reading another question here, guys, from Trent. I apologise for the pregnant pauses. Normally I have the opportunity to read these as the deliverer presents them, but tonight I'm doing both, so just bear with me. Hi David, with the spring lambing I expect a higher weaning percentage, presumably 80%, acceptable for flock replacement. Wondering if this could be achieved with the earlier lambing, or is it purely a stocking rate decision for ewes or wool producing adult sheep? So Trent, yes, lambing percentages of greater than 80% will be achieved at earlier lambing. Now, the reason why, but in merinos especially, reproduction is driven so much by nutrition that in these particular businesses, they have only, they've settled for 80%. Because if they were to achieve 80, greater than or an average of 80% lambing, then the amount of nutrition they would have to provide to their ewes would start to chew in to the number of stock they're able to run. So it is a stocking rate decision, as you said, and this is, in a wool production system, 80% lambing is sufficient for a self-replacing flock. You don't have a huge amount of choice when it comes to selecting your from young ewes, but there should be enough surplus fertility there to make some genetic improvements, while all the while cutting yourself your 7 kilos of wool per hectare per 100 mil of rainfall. So, good question from Matthew. Is there any trend in fertiliser use among the top performers? Now, Matt, if I'm actually just looking at that at the moment. Just give me 1 second here. So, one would expect that they have used considerably more fertiliser to run at these higher stocking rates. But the interesting thing is that they haven't. So the average of the database uses about $2 worth of fertiliser over the last 5 years, $2 worth of fertiliser per DSC. Now, these top 8 producers have used $1.50 of fertiliser per DSC over the same time period, which represents actually 25% less spend on fertiliser. Now, I think the key message from this is that growing more grass, doesn't always equate to higher profitability. These guys are achieving their profits by using more of what is already grown under a reasonable under a maintenance fertility program. So they're not actually out to grow a stack more pasture. They're definitely maintaining their P levels through maintenance fertiliser, but through the timing of their sales, the timing of their lambing, they'll be utilising more green feed and not allowing so much go to decay and to waste. So that's the key message there. Use more of what you've already got. First step. Once you've used all that, and you start to need to pile the fertiliser on. Now, there are businesses within that group that do fertilise quite heavily, but the most of them only fertilise, well, the average fertilise 25% less. The top 8 fertilise 25% less than the average over that 5-year time period. A good question here. Can land values be factored in? Oh, this is from Philip. Can land values be factored in to negate the effect of poor soil types in high rainfall areas? Phil, look, there's a number of different ways to approach, the assessing the performance of creating, performance indicators to compare flocks equitably. Now, what you're talking about there is sensible, but it is, it's another way of approaching it, and there'll be equal challenges in trying to compare, profit or profit per land value. And one of the key reasons is that on every given business, there's often a range of different land types. So once you start getting down to that level of detail, and people, participating in the benchmarking project, then, they'll say, oh, my weathers are run on the hills, the ewes are on the slopes, and the cattle in the gullies. How do we enter all this data? And it does become quite convoluted. I think that the per hectare per 100 mil is probably the best way to compare land use efficiency, and profit per DSE is probably the best way to compare efficiency of the operating capital wrapped up in livestock. And if you're grazing on poorer soil types in a high rainfall area, you're probably best off to focus on the per DSE KPIs rather than per hectare per 100 mil. Similar question to Matthews from Barry. Is there a relationship between long-term fertiliser use and pasture and profit? Or is this the high fertility of the land which is being used? So Barry is inferring that the top 8 producers in this analysis have been eroding existing phosphorus levels and generating these high profits as a result of that. So Barry, no, these businesses are, like I said, applying fertiliser. They'll be maintaining fertiliser or P levels. Most of the businesses are on reasonable country. They're not on the side of hillsides. But look, I don't suggest they are eroding, residual fertility. They're just utilising more pasture, or slightly more pasture. I mean, we're only talking a few percentage points here to achieve what they're achieving, whilst also applying that maintenance level fertiliser. A good question just come through from Perry. In summer dry areas, how do the top 20% have a low supplementary feeding but a high stocking rate? So Perry, speaking specifically to one of the businesses in this cohort, they have an approach, and I think it's mimicked among a few of them. They have 2 shearings each year. They have a shearing where they shear the main part of their flock, and then they have a shearing that's always in December. He says it's a terrible time to shear, but he's got to do it because he sells any surplus stock is sold in December. So, and he never sells stock in, with wool on their backs. And that there's just a long-standing rule of the business, because the benchmarking showed that, it's rare that the full value of wool is realised when it's been sold on the back of the animal. So this particular business, and a few of the others as well, they time their sales of surplus stock at the end of spring, which means that they're always carrying through only the skeleton number of stock through the summer, autumn, and early winter. The other thing is that weaner management in the later lambing systems, it's always a headache, but weaners don't take much feed, and if you they definitely don't have fast growing of weaners over that summer period. If they do need feeding, if there's not enough, some of them graze lucerne, some of them strictly supplementary feed weaners. They're definitely not growing at a rapid rate of knots, but they're definitely fed enough to ensure high levels of survival and to take them through to the next break. So because their focus is generally on wool, they're not trying to push growth rates in any young stock over the summer period. Thus their supplementary feeding is, although it's there, it's minimal in this period. The breeding stock are dry, so they generally begin to erode condition that has been built up over the late winter and spring period, and they don't need much tucker at all. One of the beauties of running a later lambing flocks is that and this is the same principle with later calving beef herds as well, the condition score of the animals, or annual average condition score of the animals can be lower with the same levels of productivity, because when they need the feed, i.e. on the lead up and immediately after lambing, they have it in front of them. So the other parts of the year, they can actually better utilise the feed reserves that are on their back, their condition score, and when they run a bit leaner year round, and when they need the feed, it's in front of them, and it doesn't come in the form of supplementary feed at that time. Look guys, it seems as though that the questions are drying up. Now, just want to reiterate that we've got another webinar next week. Mr. Peter James of the University of Queensland is going to be talking to us on lice management and eradication. He's definitely a guru in this area, and pretty happy to have been able to tie him down to talk to us about lice management. He's going to be directing the webinar at the higher end. He's going to not going to dwell too much on the basics of lice, but he's going to be talking to us at a higher level to make sure that we're all well equipped to handle lice management issues in our businesses. Don't forget the webinar at the end of this survey. Sorry, my apologies. Don't forget the survey at the end of this webinar. It's important for us to get some feedback on how do we improve these evenings, and any praise or criticisms, you're welcome to leave it there. I've got another question come through here from James. James, comment followed by question. The 2 DSE per 100 mils is very optimistic for me in the New England. Is it different for summer rainfall areas? Now James, it's a great question. So we've recently established a benchmarking group in the New England. Now it's going to be in its second year next year. Prior to this, we've only had scattered amounts of data pertinent to wool production from northern part of New South Wales, and what data we have had definitely hasn't suggested that 2 DSE per 100 mil of rainfall per hectare is a common production outcome in the New England. So I think the jury's out. I know that your harsh winters and your high, your 700-800 mil rainfall will make this target very hard to achieve. I'm not suggesting that it's not achievable, because we haven't got enough data to either say it's not possible or say that it is possible. So stick with me. In a couple of years' time, we'll have a decent data set in the New England, and we'll be able to pull some learning outcomes out of that. And one of them is 2 DSE per hectare per 100 mil possible in that sort of environment. Okay, well, questions are drying up. If anyone has any remaining questions, please drop them into me now. Otherwise, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in tonight's webinar. I hope you got a lot out of it, and looking forward to being able to see you online at our webinar next week. So okay, no more questions. Thank you for participating. On behalf of Making More from Sheep, AWI and MLA, thanks for supporting the program, and we'll see you next week for our lice management webinar. Have a good evening.